Okay, part 2, Rebuking, Slander of the Law, Eradicating Negative Karma. Part 2, with Sifu Sylvain, your trusted Buddhist friend. Thank you for being here. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. So, we'll continue the next paragraph. These 5 characters, Myoho Renge Kyo, were not entrusted even to Mahakashyapa, Shariputra, or the other disciples, though these men had, from the outset, attended the Buddha as closely as a shadow follows the body. But even setting that aside, why did the Buddha refuse to entrust them to the bodhisattvas such as Manjushri and Maitreya, predicted to be his successor in 15,000 years or whatever it is? Oh, page-turning karma rears its ugly head. Come on, break the binding. Here we go. Even though they may have been lacking in capability, because of the time, the culture, so on, it would seem unlikely that he should reject them. There are, in truth, many puzzling aspects about the matter, but the fact was that the bodhisattvas from other worlds were rejected because their connection with this world was slight. Or in other cases, although the bodhisattvas were of this Saha world, they had only recently established connections with this world. Or in still other cases, some were rejected because although they were disciples of the Buddha, they had not been among his disciples when he first aroused the aspiration for and attained enlightenment in the remote past. In other words, this was new to them. Thus, among those who had been his disciples during the 40 and more years preceding the preaching of the Lotus Sutra, or during the preaching of the theoretical teaching, the first half of the Lotus Sutra, the first 14 chapters of the Lotus Sutra, if I just read along, I would have seen that Nichiren said that, there was not one who could be called an original disciple. We see from the sutra that only these 4 bodhisattvas had been the disciples of Shakyamuni, the lord of the teachings, since numberless major world systems, thus particle kalpas in the past. From the time he had first aroused the aspiration for it and attained enlightenment, they had never followed any other Buddha, nor had they required the instruction of the theoretical and essential teachings. So again, this is, Buddhism, as you read it, slides through time effortlessly. But it's easy for us, especially in this day and age, who are so glued to the idea of temporal time. We don't think far in the past anymore. We don't think far in the future anymore. But we don't really think in the now either. We are an experiential culture of every moment being malleable but distinct. It's a very strange combination of experience. But, and this is me talking, not Nichiren, but, Nichiren was 13th century scholar, right? Bodhisattva of the 13th century. Chloe. Sorry, my dog is making disgusting noises. But anyway, so you could think in one way about cultures and capacity and the time and the capacity of people in relation to the way they thought about time. And it's not hard to imagine, even with the distortions of Hollywood movies and books and so forth, you still get the impression that people of 1,000 years ago, or heck, a couple hundred years ago, thought much more deeply about their ancestry, time, in relation to their own lives, and the legacies or the groundwork they would, with their lives, commit for their children or the future. Today, we don't think that intimately about past and future. Sure, we do from time to time, but it's not in the cultural identity that we hold. We think about more abstract concepts like climate change, if we think about that, or we run around with words like freedom, but really we never sit down and discuss what does freedom look like. What is that really? What does it really mean in a practical sense? Does it just mean you get away with just whatever you want, or does it mean that specific laws are in place to protect your ability to do some things while limiting others? Is that a negotiated freedom? Is that true total freedom? So there's a lot of nuance, but we seldom discuss nuance, and we leave it to others to figure that out. And oftentimes we get stomped on in the process because we don't pay attention to the aspects of past and future. We think very narrowly. I've heard it said dismissively that our cultures today across the world think in sound bites, right? Very, very short-term kind of achievement and satisfaction, kind of a seesaw. There's a certain freedom in that, but it's not a very good long-term solution to living your life well, nor does it speak to what you're doing at this very moment. It kind of relegates you to being just a casual observer with comments thrown in, like you're cheerleading, or not even a cheerleader, because at least they're on the field. You're in the seats, right? The bleachers. So this is our life today. So when Nichiren talks about Shakyamuni's choices in the expedient means, in the teachings of, in his dispersal of the Dharma, the teachings of Buddha over his lifetime, and he's talking about how he bequeathed the responsibility of this essential teaching of the lifespan chapters. Stop it. He was very selective about how he gave that away. He didn't just give it to any of his followers, people who had followed him for 40 years. He didn't give it to them. He was very specific in the bodhisattvas that he would offer his essential teachings to. Not so much offer, I guess I should say, as give them the responsibility for propagating those teachings. So in the Lotus Sutra, he gives it to the bodhisattvas of the earth. Why? Because those are future practicants of the essential teachings who will have grown up at a time when he had completed his teachings, and his complete teachings were available to all. I'm making a specific point of this because I have heard arguments around, there are earlier forms of Buddhism that are still valid today. You can't say those people aren't practicing Buddhism just because it's earlier forms of Buddhism. It's not, the Lotus Sutra is the only, in fact, the essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra aren't the only form of Buddhism to practice today. Yes, it is, for this very reason. Shakyamuni himself is saying in the Lotus Sutra, okay, all of you have done very well to increase your capacity and learn how to practice Buddhism correctly. And though many of you have had to rely on earlier teachings and stumbled or have gotten stuck there, now that I'm teaching the ultimate teaching, all of you are not yet ready to take on the mantle of teaching Buddhism to others. In other words, the bodhisattva path. Because as you understand, the bodhisattva path is not simply a path of attaining one's own enlightenment, like the earlier teachings would have you think. And don't forget that in earlier forms of, earlier teachings of Buddhism, to attain the level of an arhat, or an arhant, was the ultimate, or the pinnacle of your Buddhist practice. Not so. There are 3 more levels above that, and they all involve practicing in the Bodhisattva way. Trying to get my coffee here because I'm already drying out. Sorry. So he reserves this essential teachings for the Bodhisattvas of the earth after his passing. This is all very clear when you read the Lotus. Why does he do this? He does this because he understands that once he has culminated his teachings, once he has exhausted the wealth of his knowledge on the easy and immediate way to attain Buddhahood, then all previous teachings are just filler. They're just steps to get to that ultimate teachings. So if you're going to teach Buddhism from here on in after I pass, do not stop and do not proliferate these earlier teachings. Use the earlier teachings. Use them to quickly educate and train people's capacity so that they can get this, the Lotus Sutra and the essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra. That is the only teaching that need be taught once people reach this capacity. And he went on further to say that the early days of Buddhism, people will need to go through the steps to get there. In the middle days, they don't need to use the earlier steps because it will be inculcated into their cultural knowledge. But they will still need to learn earlier teachings in order to do what? Get to the essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra. So in all cases, the Lotus Sutra is preeminent. There is no replacement. There is no earlier form. There is no, this is good enough. It always culminates with the Lotus Sutra. And in the latter day, our time, some even make the argument that to learn anything else about Buddhism is irrelevant, but that goes against what the Buddha taught as well. Shakyamuni always maintained that we should study all of Buddhist scripture, texts, sermons, however you want to label them, all of the teachings, all of the scholarship of Buddhism. You should always study all of it. But your goal in your study should always be the essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra, because that was what he was teaching all along. And that without getting to the end of the book, you'll never know what happens. If you're at all interested in music or music structure, and I'll say the dirty word, music theory, you should familiarize yourself with a young man named Adam Neely, Neely. He has a YouTube channel, but specifically I'm thinking of a video I just saw that he did a couple of years ago on TEDx, you know, that platform where people speak on different subjects. And he talks about the language of music. And he makes an interesting statement about the color red. If you go and watch this TEDx talk, it's not that long. Go spend 10 minutes and go check it out. When he spoke about explaining the color red to a blind man who'd never seen anything, he said language, when you speak it, and when you use its words, although there's a vocabulary, there's a grammatic, there you know where to put nouns, verbs, adjectives, so on. No amount of words will ever be able to give that blind man a sensation of red. From its scientific description to its cultural significances to the way it works in a painting, a work of art, and so on. This is a problem of language, and Shakyamuni addressed it. He said, don't get hung up on the words, right? And when I heard Adam Neely, say, with music, I can put a phrase together on an instrument, or let alone an orchestra, but just one instrument that that I can say the word, this is what he said. He said, I can say the word anxiety to you, happy, sad, all of these words, but you won't experience them. But I can, with a small phrase of music on one instrument, make you feel tension and anxiety, which words would never be able to do. And he does, I mean, it's so simple. He goes, dun, 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 dun. So, shaving a haircut bit, right? He doesn't give that last note, and you can feel the audience feeling it. I felt it just now. That's anxiety. That's expectation. That's tension. Right? So, why do I bring that up? Because when it comes to experiencing Buddha-ness, your Buddha nature, we could spend endless volumes of books and words, even these videos, and all I can do is bring you closer to attempting it for yourself. This is why he says this can only be understood amongst Buddhas. Why does he say that? Because only those who experience their Buddha-ness can have an idea what that experience is. You cannot describe it any other way than to apply yourselves to experience it. And the quickest, fastest, most expedient way for you to experience that Buddha-ness is through chanting the Daimoku, using this mandala representation of your enlightened nature, your Go-Hanzan, and experience it for yourself. Then there will be no questions. Then you'll be the one stuck with trying to find words. But all of his teaching from day one was in order to get you to that point. So why would one bother to teach the earlier sutras and teachings and commentaries and so on? Only to help somebody who's completely ignorant of Buddhism finally develop their capacity to understand what's going on in the Lotus. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that you must recognize that those earlier teachings' only purpose is to lead eventually to the understandings of the essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra. That is why it's completely worthless, antithetical. It gets in the way to adhere to earlier teachings and stop there, because they are not the goal. They are not the teaching. They are only preparatory phases. That's why today we must learn, understand, and inculcate the essential teachings of the Lotus and practice that way. That is what will awaken our Buddha-ness. Okay? And it's everywhere through here if you're attentive. It's in the rhetoric, and it's in what Nichiren is quoting here. Nichiren is saying the same thing, but he's using the scholarship of the past, which in a way is a bit of an obstacle in itself, because by the time people are in the 13th century, a lot of the way the verbiage, the grammar, and the blah, blah, blah of 1,000 years past was confusing, just as it is today. So, I'll go on with Nichiren now. He continues, thus Tendai says, quote, the great assembly witnessed the bodhisattvas of the earth alone making this pledge. He also states, quote, the Buddha said of the bodhisattvas of the earth, these are my disciples destined to propagate my law, end quote. Miao Lo says, quote, the children propagate the law of the father, end quote. And Dao Xian states, quote, the law embodied therein in the Lotus Sutra is the law that was realized countless kalpas in the past, and therefore it was entrusted to persons who had been the Buddha's disciples from countless kalpas in the past, end quote. Thus these 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo were entrusted to these 4 bodhisattvas, the leaders of the bodhisattvas of the earth. Now again, it did that time jump again, where they're quoting when Shakyamuni was talking about his the enlightenment of Buddhahood and separating it from his life. he used the device of stating that the people who committed to Buddhahood since it was first extant was an unimaginable long time ago. But he's not talking about actual people. He's talking about the existence of Buddhahood is not something new. It's not something he alone discovered. He simply revealed it as Shakyamuni. And that the practitioners of awakening this Buddha nature it's been available to them since the same immemorial, innumerable number of times in the past, unfathomably long ago. So these aren't actual people. He's just trying to establish with his culture at that time that Buddhahood is nothing new. It's always been there. It's just that people have forgotten how to awaken it. And he's instructing them in an easy and quick way to do so. So, nevertheless, he continues, after the Buddha's passing, during the 1,000 years of the former day of the law, and the 1,000 years of the middle day of the law, and the 220 or more years that have elapsed since the beginning of the latter day of the law, nowhere in India, China, Japan, or any other place throughout Jambudvipa have these four bodhisattvas so much as once made their appearance. Why is that? Bodhisattva Manjushri, though he was not specifically entrusted with the teaching of Myoho Renge Kyo, remained in this world for 450 years following the passing of the Buddha, who spread the Mahayana Sutras, and even in the ages thereafter, he from time to time descended from Mount Fragrant or Mount Clear and Cool, assuming the form of an eminent monk in order to propagate the Buddhist teachings. Bodhisattva Medicine King took on the form of the great teacher Tendai. Bodhisattva Perceiver of the World Sounds became the great teacher Nanhui, and Bodhisattva Maitreya became Futashi. Moreover, Mahakashyapa and Ananda worked to spread the teachings of the Buddha after his passing for 20 and 40 years, respectively. And yet, in all that time, the Buddha's legitimate heirs, to whom the teaching of Myoho Renge Kyo had been entrusted, failed to make their appearance. Where are we time-wise? Oh, we're good. During this period of 2,200 and more years, worthy rulers and sage rulers have honored painted images or wooden images of Shakyamuni, the Lord of Teachings, as their principal object of devotion. But although they have made depictions of the Buddhas, of the Hinayana and the Mahayana teachings, of the flower garland, nirvana, and meditation sutras, of the theoretical teaching of the Lotus Sutra, and of the Universal Worthy Sutra, of the Mahavarachana, and other true word sutras, and of the Buddha's Shakyamuni and many treasures on the Treasure Tower chapter, the Shakyamuni Buddha of the Lifespan chapter, has never been depicted in any mountain temple or monastery anywhere. It is very difficult to fathom why this should be. The Thus Come One Shakyamuni made specific reference to the last 500-year period and never designated the 2,000 years of the former and middle days of the law as the time for propagating the Lotus Sutra. This is what I was saying earlier. The great teacher Tendai said, quote, in the last 500-year period, the wonderful and difficult to understand way will spread and benefit humankind far into the future, end quote, indicating that its propagation should be left to the future. The great teacher Dengyo wrote, quote, the former and middle days are almost over and the latter day is near at hand, end quote. In this way, he rejected the end of the middle day of the law as not being the time to propagate the Lotus Sutra. Are we to assume, then, that the great bodhisattvas, as numerous as the dust particles of 1,000 worlds who sprang up from the earth, intend to remain silent and unmoving and to go back on the promise they made when the teaching was entrusted to them by Shakyamuni, many treasures, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions? Yet even the worthy men described in the non-Buddhist scriptures know that one must await the right time. The cuckoo always waits until the 4th or 5th month to sing its song. Similarly, we read in the sutra that these great bodhisattvas must likewise wait until the latter day of the law to appear. Why do they say this? Both the Buddhist and non-Buddhist writings make clear that omens will always appear before a certain destined event actually occurs. Thus, when the spider spins its web, it means that some happy event will take place, and when the magpie calls, it means that a visitor will arrive. Even such minor occurrences have their portents. How much more so do major events? Thus, the 6 auspicious happenings described in the introduction chapter of the Lotus Sutra are great omens exceeding in magnitude any other major signs appearing in the entire life of Shakyamuni Buddha. And the omens described in the emerging of the earth chapter are immeasurably greater in magnitude than these. Therefore, Tendai says, quote, by observing the fury of the rain, we can tell the greatness of the dragon that caused it, and by observing the flourishing of the lotus flowers, we can tell the depth of the pond they grow in. Miao Lo states, quote, wise men can perceive the cause of things as snakes know the way of snakes, end quote. So all of this is, again, talking circles, really, around the idea that when the time is right, this teaching will flourish, because the people will be able to do it. By doing it, I don't mean chanting to go to the mandala. I mean, they'll be able to understand what their goal is, how to achieve it. You know, a child can pick a string on a guitar, but that doesn't mean it knows music theory and how to play guitar. All right, same thing. Now I, too, in discerning the significance of omens, will be included among the wise. The great earthquake that struck in the first year of the Shoka era, 1257, with the cyclical sign Hinotomi, on the 23rd day of the 8th month, at the time when the hour of the dog gives way to the hour of the boar, around 9 p.m., and also the great comet that appeared in the first year of Bunen era, 1264, with the cyclical sign Kinoine, on the 4th day of the 7th month. These are major portents such have never occurred during the more than 2,200 years since the Buddha's passing. It is also theorized that the comet or an eclipse, some huge heavenly event, happened when Nichiren was to be beheaded, and actually halted the proceedings. Everyone was spooked by that. So he used it to his advantage then. I wonder if they are not major signs indicating that those great bodhisattvas are now about to make their appearance in this world, bearing the great law, of which Nichiren is not unaccustomed to alluding to perhaps his role as one of the 4 bodhisattvas. Well, that's okay. That's his conviction speaking, right? 10-foot-high waves do not rise up in a foot-wide pond, and the braying of a donkey cannot cause the winds to blow. Though the government of Japan today is in chaos and the common people cry out in distress, such conditions alone could scarcely cause the appearance of such major omens. No one else understands that these are great signs foretelling that though the Lotus Sutra has perished, it is in fact eternal. So what he's talking about there is the fact that, for instance, India didn't practice Buddhism at all anymore. China became the center for many, many years, many centuries, until it was transferred to Japan. And then China went through its own changes and movements and assimilations. They tried to, and they still do, mix different traditions with the Buddhist teachings. Not all, though, but it's kind of a mishmash, as the whole world is right now, right? But the Lotus Sutra is always of tremendous value and extent. But more to the point, what Nichiren is saying is the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra, or the Buddhahood, as we were discussing earlier, the lotus of Buddhahood, or Buddha-ness, has always been and will always be. Our only charge, our only situation which is at hand is how do we reveal that stream in our own life experience, in our own human life, because that is the motive force that will bring about our full, complete, and maximal potential in this life, to live this life absolutely at its utmost. Or we can just continue to plod along and fall through life and wait for something to hit us so that we take action. All right, moving on. During the more than 2,000 years since the Buddha's passing, there have been evil rulers who were cursed by their subjects and traitorous persons who were hated by all. But Nichiren, though guilty of no fault, has without respite for the past 20 years and more been cursed and abused, assaulted with swords and staves, and pelted with rocks and tiles by people both high and low. This is no ordinary occurrence. Mine is like the case of Bodhisattva Never Disparaging, who, toward the end of the law of the Buddha, Awesome Sound King, was cursed and reviled over a period of many years. Moreover, Shakyamuni Buddha cited the example of this bodhisattva and predicted that after his own passing in the latter day of the law, events would unfold in the same manner as in Never Disparaging's time. And yet, whether here close at hand in Japan or in the distant land of China, such a thing has never been known to happen on account of the Lotus Sutra. It happens in a lot of other ways, but not specifically for the promulgation of the teachings of the Lotus. Because people hate me, no one mentions the significance of these things. If I mention it myself, it may seem to be self-praise. If I fail to mention it, however, I will commit the offense of making lies of the Buddha's words. I speak of it because to hold one's own life lightly, but to value the law, is the way of a worthy person. I, Nichiren, resemble Bodhisattva Never Disparaging, whether the ruler of a nation murders his parents or a lowly subject does away with his father and mother, though the murderers differ greatly in social position, because the cause is identical, both will fall into the hell of incessant suffering. Similarly, though, Bodhisattva Never Disparaging and I stand on different levels. We perform the same action. Therefore, if Bodhisattva Never Disparaging is destined to attain Buddhahood, can there be any doubt that I will gain the fruit of Buddhahood as well? So that's an interesting twist on, again, to his students and his inner circle and all of his followers, to not look upon his endurance of his persecutions as a negative, but to understand that they're justification, actually, for the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, not he himself. So he's very careful to make that distinction here. He says, it's not about me, Nichiren, it's about what I'm doing. It's about the cause I'm making and what the value of what it is that I'm promulgating, that is, expressing all of this angst and unsettlement from obstacles for Buddhahood, which are in the form of these people, these unenlightened people, rulers or regular run-of-the-mill people. There's so many analogies for what's going on today, but I don't want to digress. He goes on, Bodhisattva Never Disparaging was cursed by arrogant monks who observed all the 250 precepts. I, Nichiren, am slandered by and reviled by Ryokan, who is known as the foremost observer of the precepts. The monks who cursed never disparaging, though they followed him in the end, still had to suffer in the Avicii hell for 1,000 kalpas. But Ryokan has yet to seek my teachings. Hence, I do not know what will become of him. He may be destined to suffer in hell for countless kalpas. How truly pitiful. So now we go back to the Q&A. Question. With regard to the great earthquake of the Shoka era, in your remonstrative letter on establishing the correct teaching for peace of the land, which you entrusted to the lay priest Yadoya for submission to his lordship, the late lay priest of Saimyoji, on the 16th day of the 7th month in the first year of the Bunno era, 1260, with the cyclical sign Kano Suru, you stated your opinion that heaven and earth had become angered because the people of Japan were destroying Buddhism by their reliance on Honen's Nembutsu chosen above all, and that this error would bring about rebellion within the country and invasion from countries abroad. But now you say that the earthquake was an auspicious omen of the propagation of the Lotus Sutra. How do you explain the discrepancy between these two views? Well, I don't see the discrepancy, but let's see what he's going to say. Answer. That's a very good question. The fourth volume of the Lotus Sutra says, since hatred and jealousy toward the sutra abound even when the thus come one is in the world, how much more will it be so after his passing? End quote. And in the seventh volume, referring again to the time after his passing, when things will be much worse, the Buddha says, quote, after I have passed into extinction in the last 500-year period, you must spread it abroad widely throughout Jambudvipa, end quote. So we see that the hatred that abounds after the passing of the Buddha will come about in the last 500-year period when Myoho Renge Kyo will spread. And immediately following the above passage, the Buddha warns of dangers from, quote, evil devils, the devils as people, heavenly beings, dragons, yakshas, and kumbhanda demons, end quote. When the chief priest Xingman laid eyes on the great teacher Dengyo, he exclaimed, quote, the sacred words will not become extinct. Now I have encountered this man. All the doctrines that I have learned I will transfer to this Acharya from the country of Japan, end quote. And the situation today is just the same. Now, in the beginning of the latter day of the law, the time has come to propagate the 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo, so that all people throughout the country of Japan will receive the seeds of Buddhahood. When a maidservant becomes pregnant with the ruler's child, the other women grow resentful. And when a person of humble birth is presented with a jewel from the king's crown, then great troubles are bound to arise. Thus the sutra says, quote, it will face much hostility in the world and be difficult to believe, end quote. The Nirvana Sutra declares, quote, if troubles are inflicted upon a sage, then the country where he dwells will be attacked by other countries. And the Benevolent King's Sutra states essentially the same thing. If I, Nichiren, am attacked, then from heaven and earth and the 4 directions, great calamities will pour down like rain, jet up like fountains, or come surging forward like waves. If the many priests, those hordes of locusts who afflict the nation, and the ministers in power in the government persist in their ever-increasing slanders and accusations against me, in other words, what I stand for in the Lotus Sutra, then great disasters will occur in growing magnitude. When an Ashura demon tried to shoot at the god Shakra, his arrow rebounded and pierced him in the eye. And when the Garuda birds attempted to attack the dragon king Anavatapata, flames erupted from their own bodies and consumed them. Is the votary who upholds the Lotus Sutra inferior to Shakra, or the dragon king Anavatapta? The great teacher Chang'an says, quote, "One who destroys or brings confusion to the Buddha's teachings is betraying them. If one befriends another person but lacks the mercy to correct him, one is in fact his enemy." He also says, quote, "One who rids the offender of evil is acting as his parent," end quote. This is why we must intercede when we see wrongs in our lives. Okay. That's a lot to chew on for a while there. So I'm going to pause here. Put my bookmark in there. And I will see you in the next one. I hope there was a lot of things of value you can use in this. And as always, I deeply appreciate your participation. Any way you can support, it's on the screen. So you can go to my podcast, the Buddhahood podcast, available all over the place. Where you can download them so you can listen to them anytime you like. They're basically these videos transcribed as audio files, so you won't miss a thing, except my expressions and my hand movements, if those are of any value to you. Otherwise, as always, take care of your health, keep strengthening your practice, study, and ask questions, make comments. I sure do appreciate those. They help me plan lectures. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Take care of yourself.